Welcome everybody to our webinar series. And today's topic is the big why. And this is important because a lot of times we struggle and we don't understand the reasons why we struggle. And this is a problem that I've had in my life ever since I was a child in different ways. And so today I just want to bring first of all, awareness to the fact that this happens, how it impacts us on a personal level, and what we can do about it, how we can figure out what's actually happening to us and why we're struggling, and sometimes why these struggles seem to be happening, sometimes for years, decades, and, maybe there's things that you've been struggling with that for as long as you can remember and you just still can't overcome. And so I hope with today and what I share will help you see and have tools that you can use to process your own struggles. Daniel 2:22 says, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." And today what I'm going to be sharing is really how, when we have struggles in our life, we have underlying issues in our life, it's going to manifest in our everyday lives. And sometimes it manifests in physical ways, in emotional ways, in behavioral ways. And these are things that we don't always attribute to the fact that maybe there's something underlying going on in our lives. And this scripture just really resonated with me for this presentation because it's like, God is actually hardwired within our lives that when there's things happening under the surface, when there's undealt with problems or issues in our lives, it is going to manifest. It is going to come out in one way or another. It is going to be revealed. And it's important that we recognize these signs. We recognize when these things are happening and we can see them for what they truly are. And the issues in our lives will often cause physical symptoms of illness. And when we don't understand why we are feeling what we're feeling, we'll often just try to, deal with the symptoms. And I'll use an example. So many years ago, I would have constant headaches. And I always thought, oh, there's something physically wrong with me. And it wasn't until over some time and exploration and figuring out what was happening in my life that I realized, no, the reason I was having these constant headaches was because I was so stressed at work and I was working so hard. And I would literally work from 10 to 12-hour days. I would cycle to work. I would cycle back from home from work, and I would not eat all day long. And I realized that these headaches were actually being caused by the fact that I was too stressed at work to eat. And so they were actually headaches that were being caused by a lack of, lack of me eating food. And so when I realized this every time, and I actually developed a habit of forgetting to eat all the time. And at this point, once I became aware of it, I started recognizing the fact that as soon as I started getting those headaches, I would just go and eat something and instantly the headaches would go away. But for years, I had no idea that these headaches were associated with, the things that I was doing, the stress in my life. And, so, what do? What would normally do? We would normally take an Advil or some kind of pain medicine to get rid of that pain while not actually dealing with the underlying issue. And so sometimes in our lives, we'll actually be having physical symptoms of illness, but really it's our bodies telling us that there's something else going on in our life. And I think if you have a reoccurring problem in your life or something that you just can't seem to overcome, I would encourage you to maybe look a little deeper. Maybe ask yourself some questions and try to figure out what is happening and why are these things continuing to happen in your life. So when we don't realize that there are underlying reasons to what we're experiencing, we'll just continue down the same path and experience the same problems. One huge key is understanding what the physical symptoms of what our emotional states may be. It will help us recognize the fact that, for example, when I'm feeling stressed, this is what happens. This is a physical symptom or a physical manifestation that happens in my body when I'm feeling stressed. So, for example, if I started having heart palpitations, I don't immediately, I used to, but now I don't immediately think, oh my goodness, I have heart problems, or am I having a heart attack? Those aren't the thoughts that normally come to me now that I've developed this skill of digging deeper and finding out why. When I start having heart palpitations, I know that that is a sign that I'm under an extreme amount of stress and I'm not handling it well. And so then I start, examining, well, why am I stressed? What's going on in my life that, maybe needs to be addressed or needs to be shifted? And so understanding the physical symptoms of how, like, the things that happen to you physically during different emotional states is going to be key to you navigating through this process. And I would like to encourage you, don't just deal with the symptoms, because then you'll never actually resolve the issues that are causing the problems in your life in the first place. So, depending on what it is that you're dealing with, there can be many, many different physical symptoms. These are just some of the most common that I personally have experienced. And so, I'll just quickly go over the list, but, headaches, migraines, sleeplessness or insomnia, heart palpitations, panic attacks, sweating, stomach aches, feeling overly tired, having a lack of appetite, adrenal fatigue, food cravings, addictive behaviors, nausea, having a dry mouth, excessive crying, unable to control my breathing, having difficulty concentrating, or having issues with memory, or literally being unable to do anything. And, this is a long list of symptoms, but I mean, literally, it could be way longer. And for you, maybe some of your physical symptoms are different, and maybe for now, up until now, you've attributed them to something actually physically wrong in your body. And I would, just ask you to put that thought on hold and consider for a minute, as I continue to share tonight, the possibility that maybe some of these are connected to some things in your life that, need some healing, or need some resolution, or need some, God to bring some truth to your life. Honestly, like I already mentioned, like headaches and migraines was a huge one for me. And sleeping and insomnia, like when I was under so much stress, like my mind would race at night and I couldn't even sleep. It would take me hours, sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours just to fall asleep, only to be waking up another 3 hours later. And so I'm sure some of you can relate to some of these physical symptoms on this list. But the question is, why was I having heart palpitations, right? And so I'm going to share a few of my stories today as we go along, just so that you can maybe relate, how you can see yourself maybe in my story, how you can see maybe some of these things playing out in your own life, and maybe have some, sense of hope for moving forward, that you don't have to struggle with these things, and these don't have to be normal physical outcomes that you have every day. So in regards to how we feel physically, these are some of the areas that may be attributing to these actual physical ailments that we're having. Now, the first one is just blah, and to go into a little more detail, that's kind of just like when you're like, oh, I just can't do anything. I just, like, I'm unmotivated. I just feel like blah, like there's nothing good about today. Like, there's just nothing that encourages you to do anything. That's one huge area where I think a lot of us can relate to. It's just like you wake up that day and you're just like, oh, this is going to be a rough day, right? That you're already starting off on a bad foot. Another area that we could struggle is being unmotivated. And this one for me is a huge trigger, a huge, like a light bulb that goes on for me, is when I start feeling unmotivated, I'm like, okay, there's something going on under the surface that I haven't really put attention to. And it's a really good indication for me. And I suggest perhaps for you as well, that if you normally are, motivated, you normally are, pursuing things, you like, and then all of a sudden it's like, you have no sense of purpose, or you have no sense of drive, just everything is, monotone, that's a really good indication that there's something going on under the surface. Another example could be lack of energy. Now, all of these aren't necessarily associated with an underlying issue, because sometimes we experience these things just as a byproduct of life. But what I'm asking you to consider is the fact that, if I'm having a consistent lack of energy that has no reason behind it, it's an opportunity for me to look, is there a deeper reason why? Then there's physical illness, mental illness. Spiritual disconnect is another huge one as well, because a lot of the times we don't recognize that, God is always with us. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us, and he says he's as closer than a brother, I guess what I'm trying to say. So if he's that close and he's that interested in our life and he's speaking to us all the time, why is it that sometimes in our biggest times of struggle, we feel the most disconnected to God? And I would say it's because there's something underlying, something that's causing us to have, to have pulled back from God, to maybe not trust him the way we used to maybe have, unforgiveness issues. Like, there could be a lot of things there, but spiritual disconnect is an area where, to me, that would be a really big red flag that there's something going on. Another area would be isolation. If all of a sudden I'm starting to feel, I don't want to be around people, I just want to be alone, and I try to isolate and try to, not be around people, that's a good indication that I have to deal with something. Terror, so that's an extreme form of fear. That would be a good indication. Fatigue, rejection, anger or rage. And these are things that, like I said, they, they'll come up suddenly, or they seem to be consistent, and they keep coming up over and over and over again. Another one could be abandonment, to feel that you've been abandoned. Anxiety and depression, we've talked a lot about those two things, but these are really prevalent, and they seem to come up all the time because we don't always recognize the signs. We don't always recognize that these are being caused by some underlying issue that hasn't been resolved. Another one could be fear. If you're feeling self-hatred towards yourself, or another one could be immense grief, hopelessness, stress, insecurity, sadness, frustration, and being overwhelmed. So with all of these emotions and all of these mental states, my question to you is, have you ever felt any of these ways, but you literally had no idea why? Because I can tell you, for me, I do. And most of the time it's like my husband will come home and he'll be like, whoa, what's going on with you? You seem this or you seem that. And honestly, my answer to him is, yes, I feel those ways right now, but I have no idea why. And I'm almost 100% certain that every person who's going to be watching this webinar, you can resonate with this, that you have felt this way. And it's in those times where it's like, life is going good. There's nothing to complain about. I have no issues in life, but it's like, I'm so depressed. I can't get out of bed. I have no motivation. I have so much anxiety. But why? Where is it coming from? And why am I struggling with it now? So this is a awesome scripture, Psalms 139:23. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And so this is a skill that I've developed over the years, is like, whenever I get to that place where it's like, I'm having all these overwhelming emotions, I'm having these physical responses, I'm having all of these issues happening. And it's like, when I don't know what's going on, I have discovered the fact that I can go to God and I can ask him to search my heart and to show me what's going on. And sometimes I hear instantly what's going on, and other times I have to work a little harder and dig a little deeper and listen a little longer and wait till I get that, revelation or that understanding or those, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense now. But this is a great a reminder to us that, even in the times where maybe we feel disconnected to God, those are the times we should be drawing near to him. We should be going to him and asking him to show us what's going on in our life. So today, one of the main things I want to bring up is this iceberg analogy. Now, in the picture that you see in front of you is you see above the water, you see a huge iceberg. And this iceberg represents what we see, what we feel, and what we experience in our lives. These are all of the visible things. So this would be, like I mentioned earlier, all those physical reactions or physical issues that we seem to have. It could also be the emotional responses that we're having, like the deep sadness or the grief or the feelings of depression. And we can try to chip away and deal with just those symptoms, just those things that are visible at the top of the iceberg, because we don't realize that there's anything under the surface. We don't realize that there's anything contributing or causing these reactions in us. But when we reveal what's underneath the surface, you can see that the much larger part of this iceberg is not the emotions that we're feeling, is not the physical manifestations that we're having. There is a whole larger piece of the puzzle that is laying under the surface. And unless we dig deeper, unless we try to find what those deeper issues are, we will not find the root of the problem. We often don't realize that there is more to the situation than what we can see that's just on the surface. So how do we discover the deeper why to our struggles? And this is the question I want to answer today. And this is something that I've worked on for years, that I've found to be not only effective in my life, but the more that I do this process and the more that I get comfortable with, asking these kinds of questions, then the quicker I come to the realization of what's actually going on within me. And I'll give you some examples as we move on. So what you're going to do is when you start to have these issues, when you start to have these physical and emotional manifestations, you're going to start asking yourselves questions. And most of those questions will be why questions. And when I was a kid, my uncle used to get so irritated at me. And I remember being 9, 10 years of age. And I did a lot of babysitting for my cousins. And so I spent a lot of time at their house. And I remember, he was a very smart man and he liked to talk about things a lot. And so he'd start sharing something with me. And everything he said, I would just say, but why? And then he would answer that question, but it didn't fully answer, like it didn't fully give me the picture about, to understand exactly what it was. So then I would say, okay, but why that or why this? And so I constantly just kept asking, but why? But why? And he would always answer my questions. He was so gracious to me, but there was times where I could tell it was like, oh, Laura, are you kidding me? Can't you just leave this, issue alone? But it was just, I was just so inquisitive. I wanted to understand why. Why do these things happen? Why do people think that way? Because I believe that if we can understand the why, then we can create solutions for any problem that we'll face. And so I remember doing this even from as a young child. And maybe that's why in my older years, I actually find, this easier than some people do. But I hope some of these questions and some of these things that I encourage you today will help spur you on, will help encourage you and help actually give you ideas for other questions that would be helpful in your situation. So it takes an average of 7 times of asking yourself why before you get to the real reason why you're struggling. And I have actually found this to be true, not only in myself, but in my family and also in those that I've been mentoring. A lot of times, you know, for example, someone will say, well, I'm feeling depressed. Okay, no problem. That's just a symptom. So then I'll ask, well, why do you feel depressed? Or what, you know, what are some of the thoughts that you're having associated with feeling depressed? And so then they'll share, well, I feel like I lack in this area. Okay, so what about your life makes you feel that you lack in that area? So then they go deeper. And each time we ask that question, it goes a little deeper until all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, that's the real reason I'm struggling. And if we're not able or are not willing or not in a place where we're able to do that, then we're just going to be skimming the surface. Basically, just at the top of this iceberg, we're not going to actually be getting to the root reason why we're struggling, and we won't be able to solve the problem. So 2 Corinthians 4:18. So we fix our eyes on not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary and what is unseen is eternal. And so, you know, applying this scripture to this iceberg theme, when we fix our eyes just on the things that we see, just the problems that we're having, just on the physical ailments or symptoms that we're having, or the emotional manifestations that we're experiencing, we're only looking at the temporary part of our life. But when we look deeper, that's when we look into, the parts of us that are wounded, the parts of us that need healing, the parts of us that are, unresolved, need forgiveness, need God to bring, healing and restitution to. And those are the parts that are eternal. Those are the parts that impact the rest of our life. Those are the parts that, in some cases, actually, impact our salvation. If we're on so holding so much anger and forgiveness towards God that we actually want nothing to do with him, but we don't deal with that because we don't know why that's there. We don't deal with the reason why that's happening. Those are the things that are eternal. So we can't just fix our eyes on what we see or experience. We got to go deeper. We have to see what is beyond those things, what is eternal. So before we go here, I actually just want to share a story. For most of my younger life, and some of you might know this story, but I'm going to share it anyways. For most of my younger life, I felt rejected. No matter where I went, I could be with my family, I could be in a room with, 50 people, but the moment I walked in that room, I always felt rejected. And I always, if someone, if I perceived someone as looking in my direction and they would have a facial expression, I would immediately think, oh, they're disappointed in me, or I've done something to offend them. And these were all the thoughts that would go through my mind. And it wasn't until I believe I was 20 years old, and I went to this inner healing session, and the ladies just said, we're going to just pray and ask Holy Spirit to bring up whatever issue he wants to deal with today. And so as we sat there and they prayed for me, all of a sudden, I started seeing this picture in my mind. And the picture at first wasn't clear. And then all of a sudden, the picture started to become more clear. And so as I was watching this play out in my mind, I saw this baby girl being rolled down a hallway in a hospital in an incubator. I didn't know who the girl was. I didn't know why I was seeing this. All I saw was this baby girl in an incubator being rolled down a hallway. At this point, I saw the nurse roll her into a room, and as soon as the baby was rolled into the room, there was a woman on the bed, and as soon as she saw the baby in the incubator, she turned her back on that baby, and instantly I felt all those feelings of rejection again. And so in this encounter, immediately I understood that it was on my day of birth that I believed that I was rejected. And that was the thing that I had been experiencing my whole life up to that point. And so it was in that memory that they, quickly recognized the fact that that was the lie that I had believed. I had believed that I had been rejected by my own mother. So if I couldn't even be accepted by my own mother, then I was rejected by everyone. That was a belief that I had, and I had no idea. This happened on the day I was born. So anyways, in this encounter, I'm experiencing these deep, deep, deep feelings of rejection. And the ladies say, okay, that's what Satan wanted you to believe in that moment, but what is the truth? Where do you see Jesus in the room? And at first I didn't see him anywhere. And up until this point, the whole thing that I was seeing was there was no sound. It was, and then all of a sudden it was like the volume was turned on. So now I could actually hear myself crying. I could hear the lady on the bed crying, and I could hear a nurse saying, "I'm sorry, Grace, you can't hold her because she's very vulnerable right now." And so that was the first thing to recognize, okay, I'm crying, my mom's crying, and the nurse is saying my mom can't hold me. So the ladies who are doing this prayer session with me said, okay, where's Jesus in this picture? And it took a while. And at first I couldn't see him at all. And I never actually saw his face or his body, but all of a sudden I saw his hand. And he brought out one hand and he grabbed my hand. And then he took his other hand and he grabbed my mom's hand. And as soon as he grabbed both of our hands, we stopped crying. And at that point, the spirit of rejection immediately left me. And I knew that I was loved. I knew that my mom loved me. And I knew that she was grieving for the fact that she couldn't even console me. She couldn't even hold me and all of these things. And so, we went through this encounter. There was more prayer work that was done in this area, but it was so transformational. And that day, part of me was like, was that even true? Because I have no idea what happened on my day of birth. So anyways, I went home. I called up my mom and I said, something really weird happened today. I told her the whole thing and I said, can you tell me if any of this was true? Was any of this accurate? Why, if it is, why was I in an incubator and why did these things happen? And so my mom not only confirmed that it was all true, but she told me that the reason I was in the incubator was because when I was born, my blood was toxic and they had to give me a full blood transfusion. And so I was very vulnerable at that age, that point, and they couldn't take me out of the incubator till they knew I was, out of the woods. So that was a very healing thing in my life. But for most of my younger years, for 20 years of my life, I struggled with feelings of rejection. No matter where I went, no matter who I was with, no matter how many times they said that they loved me, they accepted me, they cherished me, it didn't make a difference. I felt rejected, and there was some fundamental thing within my life that was unresolved, that was unhealed, that caused me to believe that even beyond the facts, even beyond what was happening in my life. And so a lot of times when we have these consistent issues in our life, we have these problems, these mindsets, these things, these thought patterns that we just can't overcome. I believe that it's because there is something underlying. There is some trauma point. There is a point, there is a root in your life that needs healing. It needs truth from God to bring healing and resolution to those issues. And so that's just one of my many, many stories of, digging deeper, allowing God to give me answers to the questions that I have, and not being afraid to ask these questions, and not being, afraid to take what I'm feeling seriously, because all of those things are clues as to where we struggle and where we need some more help. So how do we do this? What are some questions you can ask yourself? Well, the first one is, well, what am I feeling? Because sometimes we don't even know what we're feeling. It's like, well, am I feeling depressed? Maybe not. Am I feeling anxious? Maybe a little, but that's not the main problem. Like, so sometimes we actually have to, you know, delve into it a bit and actually figure out what exactly is it that I'm feeling. Then the next question would be, well, when did I start feeling this way? You know, did it start last Tuesday? Did it start last month? Have I been feeling this way for a whole year? Like those points, those answers to these questions are extremely important. And then ask yourself, well, why am I feeling this way? So if you're feeling depressed, well, why am I feeling depressed? Another question you can ask yourself is, did someone, something, or an event trigger these feelings in me? And on this note, I'm actually going to share another quick story. And this is a recent story of something that just recently happened. But so my Mother's Day this year was extremely difficult for me. And to be totally honest with you, at the time, I had no idea why. Mother's Day should be an awesome day. It should be a day of celebration. It should be a day where, I feel cherished and loved. But for me, it was a really hard day. Not only was I very emotional, but I did a lot of crying that day. I felt completely disconnected to my family. And at one point my husband said, what's wrong? What's going on? And all I could say is, I don't know. And I can't explain why I'm feeling this way. And, when I look at the facts about what that day was, it was actually a fantastic day. Like I got to spend the whole day with my family doing something that I love. I absolutely love to be in the mountains. I love Kananaskis. And they said, Mom, what do you want to do today? We want to do whatever it is that you want to do. And I said, I just want to go to the mountains. And so we literally hopped in the car with some snacks and drinks and, sports equipment and games and whatnot. And we just drove to the mountains and we spent the day in the mountains. And the weather was perfect. The skies were blue, the temperature was perfect, like everything about the day was perfect. But I couldn't shake this intense grief and sadness and emotion. And it didn't make sense to me. Like I should be having a great day. I should be enjoying this day. And so I started asking myself some deeper questions. Why am I feeling so sad? When did I start feeling this way? And as I started asking these questions, it started becoming clear to me what was happening. And so what I realized was the fact that the day before Mother's Day, I was actually at home cleaning my house, and sometimes I like to either clean my house to like worship music, or sometimes I put a movie on just to play in the background, just to hear, a movie or a story of something. And so this particular day I thought, oh, I'll just put on this movie. And so I put this movie on the TV, and it was a great movie. It was a fantastic movie until the end. It was a story about this couple, and they had gotten married and they were having a baby, and it was amazing. It was such a well done movie right until the end. And this woman, excuse me, she ended up having a miscarriage. And obviously hearing that, it triggered something within me. It brought me back to my miscarriage and all the grief that I felt. And I just started weeping and bawling. And, I processed that and I got through that, and I thought it was over. But little did I know, the next day was Mother's Day. And, here I am trying to enjoy the day with my family, and I'm having a terrible day. I'm just overcome with grief. And I realized that that wasn't even the root to the problem. That was my trigger, but there's other things that were, underlying. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that movie triggered that memory, but why is it bothering me still? Because God's walked me through some healing and resolution in these things. And so I asked more questions. And in doing so, I realized that right around this time also was some of you may know my stepdaughter actually is expecting, so I'm actually going to be a grandmother soon. But right around this time, she announced that she was what they were having, and she announced that they were having a baby girl. And so that revealed to me part of my underlying issue is the fact that I still have not dealt with some of my issue, or not even issue, but just frustration to God about the fact that, the baby that I lost in my miscarriage was actually a girl, and she was a child that I had deeply wanted and had incredible grief over. And so I realized the fact that I was experiencing all of these things because this memory was triggered and this whole situation with Erin. And I want to be happy for her. And so I'm actually glad that God brought all of this stuff up. And I believe that He's strategic in when He does this, because I want to be able to celebrate with Erin when she has her baby. I want to be excited for her. I want to be able to hold my granddaughter and be happy and excited. I don't want it to constantly be triggering me in my emotions. And so that tells me, I'm sorry for getting emotional. So that tells me that there's still some underlying issues for me and my miscarriage that I need to process with the Lord. And I need Him to bring some better resolution to and healing to, so that I can move forward and I can become a grandmother and I can be excited and I can have joy about this instead of grief. And so even though it was hard, my Mother's Day, I'm glad that all of this happened. But I could have gone through the whole day and been like, yeah, I don't know why I'm feeling so sad. I'll just get over it. But I've realized the fact that, these emotions, these physical things that we feel, they're God trying to tell us that something is happening in our life. There's something deeper. There's something that we need to resolve. There's something that we need to ask forgiveness for, or, process in some way. And God understands the fact that this is something I need to deal with very soon before my granddaughter arrives, because I don't want to have this to be triggered in me in the future. And so, in the next couple months, or a couple weeks, I'm going to be processing this more with the Lord and have Him reveal to me what's still left undone. And so for you, maybe something you're going through could have been triggered by somebody, could be triggered by a memory, even a scent, so don't dismiss the fact that sometimes when you're experiencing things, it could be showing you a situation that's happening or that happened in your life previous that's still unresolved. Another thing you can ask yourself, what thoughts am I having at this time? This is a good question to ask yourself when, you're like, I have no idea what I'm feeling. Because our thoughts will actually give us a lot of clues as to what we're feeling. If our thoughts are negative towards ourselves or towards someone else, or maybe we're, negative about thoughts about what our future looks like, those are all great clues as to, well, what is it that I'm struggling with? Another area is, what do I need? Do you have any needs in your life that you have been neglecting? Because sometimes when you experience those things, there are also signs that things are wrong. Some other things I'd like you to consider. Consider getting a journal. When you're wanting to process through these things, journaling is actually a really good tool to use. because sometimes you don't know how to verbalize what you're thinking or what you're feeling. But when you start writing, it's like literally some days when I'm journaling, I just start writing and I just keep on writing. And then afterwards, I go back and I read what I wrote, and I was like, wow, I had no idea that that's what was inside of me. And so don't be afraid to write out the things that are on your heart. And even as you're writing, sometimes when I'm writing, I'm like, I have a tendency sometimes to say, oh no, don't write that, or you can't say that or whatnot. But no, it's important for you to write down the truth of what you're feeling, the truth of what you're thinking, because, if you just partially expose your heart, you're not getting to the root. I've done that for so many years, even talking to, family or some good friends. Sometimes I only tell part of the story, right? And they don't have a full picture of what I'm going through, or they don't have a full understanding. And it's not giving me permission to process my stuff either, because I'm only allowing part of what my issue is to be exposed. And so journaling is a great way. It's a safe place. You're not unburdening it on anyone else. In fact, a lot of those journals that I do a lot of my like venting in, or just letting everything out in, those are books that later will be burned, right? Because no one needs to read those things again once they've been resolved and dealt with and let out of myself. So I would get just a journal or a notebook that you can do a lot of this processing with, and write down the answers to your questions. So when you're asking yourself these questions, actually write down the answers. The next step would be to be very specific. And this is one key. So, for example, if I ask myself, why am I feeling depressed? And then I said, I'm feeling depressed because, and then whatever the reason was, then I could use those words, those key words from what I wrote there, and be like, okay, well, why do I feel that way? Right? And that helps me to keep digging deeper. So each time you do that, you look for keywords in your answer from the other one, and you keep asking yourself more questions. Okay, well, why do I feel that way? Why is that my perspective? What belief do I hold to that causes me to believe that thing? Another thing to consider is what is going on in your life at the time. And, so sometimes it could be related to a loss in a family. Sometimes it could be related to an accident. Sometimes it could be related to a loss of a job. Consider what's going on in your life and see if it has anything to do with what you're struggling with at the time. Also, consider, are there any physical symptoms that I'm feeling that are associated with the way that I'm feeling? So, for example, I know some of my physical manifestations of stress, what they are. And so when I start feeling those physical reactions, that's a good time for me to say, okay, I'm feeling stressed, but why am I feeling stressed? What's causing this stress? And so, being mindful of those physical symptoms and what they're a sign of, what emotion, will also be helpful in you discovering what's going on. Another thing to consider is, do you feel this way often? Or do you feel it only at certain times? Do you feel this way at certain times of the year? For example, I know some people who struggle with, seasonal depression. Okay, so I would ask them, okay, so is there something that happened significant that happened at this time of year for you? So for example, my grandmother died at the end of October when I was just 21 years old, and she was a significant person in my life. And so I recognize that around that time of year, I go through a cycle where I remember that loss, and I
I don't grieve it anymore, but I recognize the fact that, you know, when I feel down at some certain times like that, I recognize the fact that this is cyclical. This is the time that I lost my grandmother, and she was a huge part of my life. Another example I'll use, actually, I won't use this because men might be watching this, but it could be hormonal. That's as far as I'll go. Okay, so sometimes when you're feeling something, maybe it is more hormonal. And these are questions that you can be asking yourself. For example, you know, once a month at the same time every month, I start feeling a certain way. Well, and I actually block those times off my calendar, and I tell myself, Laura, during that week or during that time block of time, don't take yourself too seriously, right? Don't think too deeply about too many things because I'm not really in the right frame of mind because my hormones are all over the place. So that's another thing you can consider. What thoughts are you having about yourself, perhaps others, or even God when you're struggling? Now, I recognize that when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed or frustrated, that often my thoughts regarding some people in my life that are close to me get pretty negative. And that's a good indication to me when, you know, when things are out of balance, when things are not the way that they should be, and I have to, you know, look deeper and figure some things out. Because honestly, I love these people that are close to me. They are people I cherish, and these thoughts that I'm having towards them, they're not based on reality, but they're based on something that's underlying. And so those are also a good indication. What are your thoughts? Not just about yourself, but about others, God, or even your circumstance. Another thing you could consider is, are there things that you need to deal with? Is there something that you need to face? Have there been things that you've been avoiding that are causing issues in another area of your life? Or is there someone you need to forgive for how they've wronged you? Perhaps even yourself for something you've done. Forgiveness is a huge roadblock to healing in our life. And I found it to be a significant thing that I have to do when releasing issues in my life. And it's usually not just forgiveness for other people who have wronged me or harmed me, but also forgiveness for myself for when I've done things wrong, when I've, you know, stepped out of line, when I've hurt other people. And we need to be able to walk through that forgiveness process. There could also be times where you need to repent to God or even another person. And lastly, is there something that you need to let go of? This could include unmet expectations, failures, unfulfilled dreams, or even words that others have spoken over you, maybe even abusive relationships. So sometimes, you know, you might be holding on, might be clenching onto things that, you know, not only are not good for you, but they're causing you harm. And maybe as you dig deeper, you're going to realize that, you know, you need to let some things go. You need to close some doors to old chapters of your life, to things that no longer serve you. And so these aren't all the questions you can ask. And as you get skilled in this and as you do it more, it'll just become more natural, and you'll just start to naturally be like, okay, but that doesn't make sense. So why is that happening? And just keep asking yourself more and more questions until you dig deep and get to the root of the problem. And another thing you can ask is, what does God want you to know about your area of struggle? I have found that most of the time at the root of the struggles that we have is often a lie. And for me, there's always been a lie. There's always been something that I have believed that wasn't true. And I'm a believer of, if you can't believe the truth if you're believing a lie, right? You have to replace that lie with a truth. And so you need to ask God to speak truth to you so you can resolve that issue in your life. And you likely won't be able to come up with this yourself. You're going to need God to speak truth to you, because sometimes we can't see past our circumstances. We can't see past our pain and our hurt. And we're going to need God to show us what the truth is in those moments. Another important scripture, Isaiah 55, 8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And so I want to end this part on this note, is the fact that when we get to the root, when we get to that issue, when we finally realize what's going on, that's when we need to be pursuing God. That's when we need to be asking him to show us what he sees, what he thinks, what his truth is in those situations. And it's when we partner with the truth, it says the truth will set us free, right? And why does the Bible say that? It's because once we believe the truth, we can no longer be held captive by the lies, by the deception, by the woundings that have been caused by people and situations in our life. So for the next 5 or so minutes, I want to do an activation. And we're going to ask ourselves the deeper why. And to get to the root of your feelings, you'll need to continue asking yourself why until you get to your underlying issue. If you're not sure where to start, you can use some of these question prompts to help you go deeper. So, I mean, I'm sure that we all can relate to the fact that we have multiple issues that we need to deal with. But today I would just like you to consider one area that you would like to discover the deeper underlying reason in your life. So just pick one thing. It could be small. It could be a little larger. It's up to you. Just pick one thing and start asking yourself those why questions and start writing down the answers. And Connie's going to put on a song, and it'll be about 5 or 6 minutes, and just see what comes up. As you keep answering these questions, just see where that takes you. And you might be surprised once you get down, 5 questions or 6 questions in, you might be like, oh, you'll start to realize that it dials down deeper to what you think is just happening on the surface. Okay, so for 4 keys to remember from today. Number 1, don't be satisfied to only deal with your symptoms. Recognize them for what they are and pursue the deeper things. Number 2, your struggles are not a sign of weakness, only that you have something that needs to be addressed in your life. Be empowered to find the solutions. Number 3, take your thoughts seriously. They'll help you discover the underlying issues. And number 4, continue asking yourself questions until you uncover the root of your issue. Once you discover that, then you will be able to heal from it or resolve it quickly. And what you see on the outside is just the tip of the iceberg. Our next webinar is July 6th, and our topic is going to be about resilience. So how do we overcome difficult circumstances and actually build resilience in our lives? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And Connie and I will be tag teaming on that one. So you'll be hearing from both of us. And yeah, so we'd love to see you come back next month. And this is for anyone who watches this call and you are struggling in your life and you actually desire a mentor in your life to help you walk through your struggles. We now have an online booking page. You can go to our website at nosafoundation.com and book your own session. You can pick who you want to meet with, whether it's Connie, me, or if you have any men who are looking for a mentor, they can also pick Walter. And finding a good mentor is sometimes difficult, but it's invaluable and it will change your life forever. I know it has for me and the people that I've seen be impacted by mentorship. And so if that's something that you need or you desire, don't hesitate to reach out.
For those who might be watching this that, you have overcome your struggles or some struggles and you want to partner with others in helping them overcome as well, we are developing our mentorship training and we'll be launching that soon. So if that is something of interest to you, reach out to us and we can send you the application process and get you started in that whole process if that is something that you desire to be part of. And last but not least, if you like hearing Connie and I, especially on the go, check us out on our podcast, the NOSA Unleashed podcast. We really love just chatting together, sharing our stories. And it's more like a conversation where we just talk back and forth about some of these different issues that we're covering each month. And so if that's something that you enjoy, feel free to subscribe to this podcast and we would love for you to listen in there as well. So have a very blessed month and we'll see you next time.